Welcome to this opening of the exhibition, Victor Papanek, The Politics of Design. I'm really happy to have so many people here for a person like Victor Papanek, who is not among the most famous designers in history, but it's a real discovery, this exhibition, this I can promise. The exhibition that we're opening today is long overdue, I would say, because there has never been a real retrospective on Victor Papanek's work. And this is even more surprising because Papanek was, in the 1960s and 70s, one of the main protagonists of the design scene. It was in that era that Papanek brought entirely new themes on the agenda of design, like sustainability, gender equality, design for the global south. So Papanek somehow had a nose for what happened in society and translated that into the design discourse. His biography is very closely linked to shifts that happened in society in the 20th century. For example, at first, Papanek had to emigrate or to flee from Vienna due to his Jewish background to the United States. And then he followed a career as a rather conventional industrial designer first. He studied industrial design, practiced in the style of people like Charles and Ray Eames or George Nelson, so the typical post-war design style was what he also practiced in the late 1950s. But then in the 1960s, under the influence of people like Buckminster Fuller, Marshall McLuhan, he broke away from that approach and became a kind of guru for the alternative views on design. And in this era is what we are focusing on in the exhibition. It was a time which was politically as dynamic and as controversial as our current time. So it's really interesting to compare these two eras, because in Papanek's surrounding, for example, in the United States, people were discussing about racism, about gender issues. They protested against Vietnam and overconsumption. And it was Papanek who linked all these discussions to design and developed this new attitude towards developing products and ideas for society. He brought design into TV. He wrote bestsellers about design. He was able to condense his ideas on design into very popular and short claims, which today would probably become immediate hits on Twitter. At the end of the 20th century, Papanek's fame suffered a little because it was about other things in design at that time. For example, about keeping the design industry running, and less about the political attitude that was reflected in design. It was less about asking what people actually really need and what makes sense. So Papanek was a little bit forgotten in the last decades of the 20th century, but what we see in the last 5 to 10 years is that the interest in Papanek is growing rapidly again. I think this is also because a lot of themes that Papanek brought up are being discussed again. We have a lot of debates in the design discourse about words like social design, like critical design, sustainability, participation, you know, the word open design. Who is the author of a piece? Is it the collective or the individual author? All these themes are coming up again, and it's quite fascinating to see in the exhibition how Papanek thought about many of these themes decades before. So this is why I think the exhibition comes exactly at the right moment. And it was already in 2011 that we had Papanek on a list of names of people about whom we would like to do a monographic exhibition one day. But as it often happens, it lasts a few years. You have other themes that you would like to do before, and so we forgot him again, or forgot the exhibition idea again. But then in 2015, I got an email from Alison Clarke from the Victor Papanek Foundation, who asked us, without knowing that we had discussed this, if we were interested in doing an exhibition on Victor Papanek. So I answered her within 5 minutes, yes, we want to do it. And sometimes it needs this push from outside or this common thought to realize a great project together. So we teamed up with the Victor Papanek Foundation, Alison Clarke, and the Hochschule für angewandte Kunst in Vienna, and realized this exhibition that we're opening today. And I would like to thank Alison Clarke and the Papanek Foundation and the Hochschule für angewandte Kunst in Vienna very much for this great trust that you have put in us, and for having collaborated and co-curated with us this exhibition. An exhibition of that scale would not be possible without many supporters and also other partners. And I would like to thank the German Cultural Foundation, Kulturstiftung des Bundes, for having granted a very generous support to this exhibition. I would also like to thank Volkswagen Group Culture, who also supported the exhibition as a global partner and will accompany the exhibition as a sponsor during its international tour. And finally, I want to thank our sponsor Geberit for equally supporting the exhibition here in Weil am Rhein. My really big thanks also go to the curators of the exhibition, Alison Clarke and Amelie Klein. Both worked as co-curators on this project. So thank you very much, Amelie and Alison, for the great work that you've put together. And they were greatly supported by Amelie's assistant curator, Erika Pinner, who also helped to make this a great exhibition. And I also want to thank Leah Armstrong, head of the archive of the Victor Papanek Foundation, and Christina Hoffmann, her assistant. So last but not least, I should also mention Jan Boelen, who will be on stage in a second, who worked as an advising curator and also brought in very important insights into this project. And also this collaboration on the exhibition, I think, helped very much to link the view on Papanek with many contemporary design projects that will also be shown in the exhibition. Last but not least, I would like to draw your attention to this beautiful catalog that we've published for the exhibition that was realized by Daniel Street, graphic designer from London. So I don't want to see anybody going out the museum without this catalog in your hand. So now I would like to hand over to Mr. Gerald Bast, Rector of the Hochschule für Angewandte Kunst in Vienna, to say a few words about the collaboration.
Yes, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. Having had the opportunity as the home institution of the Papanek Foundation to contribute to this wonderful, and I saw it already, wonderful, really wonderful and important exhibition. So I have to tell you that we established the Victor Papanek Foundation in the year 2008. And this date and the establishing this foundation marked kind of a social turn at our university. Social turn is a big word, but indeed we made some new ideas happen for the students, with the students. We established a social design program. We established new symposia organized by the Papanek Foundation on design and politics, design and environment. And we also established a transdisciplinary innovation lab. So some people ask me, as head of an institution dedicated to educating young, inspired people, do you think that design, that art is able to change the world? A topic we can see at the exhibition as well. And I say no. The art and design cannot change the world. But what the art and what design is able to is to change people. And this is what Victor Papanek wanted to do and what he did. Getting in contact with his ideas brings a change to the minds of the people. And this we need. And this we need in these days. And so I wish this exhibition and the catalog too, a lot of visitors and readers, because it cannot be more necessary to bring the ideas of Victor Papanek in our times and in the heads of students, of designers, of politicians, of people in the economy, to be able to change the world. And this is what we need indeed. Thank you very much, and congratulations to this fantastic exhibition.
Thank you, Mr. Bast. After this talk, we'll go over to the museum to open the exhibition. There will be drinks outside the museum. They cannot be taken inside. And now I would like to welcome our 4 guests on the panel. Alison Clarke, co-curator of the exhibition and director of the Vitra Papanek Foundation. Lucy Orta, artist and professor at the London University of Arts. Jan Boelen, director of Z33. He's also the curator of the current Design Biennale in Istanbul, actually, that is still running until early November. And Amelie Klein, curator at the Vitra Design Museum and also co-curator of the exhibition. Enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Sorry, water first. Okay, first things first. So, I was quoting a very important manifesto. Welcome. I'm very excited to see that many faces here in the fire station at the Vitra Design Museum. We will discuss today if design can save us. Now, the first question that I have, and I really want to... Oh, first I would like to say hello to Victor Papanek's friends and family who came here and to be with us. Ilju Sotoma and Goroslav Keller and Halen, formerly Papanek, and now I'm blanking. Okay, so please welcome them with me. They're here with us today. It's very exciting. And Tinti, Ilju's wife, whose work you will see in the exhibition, by the way. So I would like to start with maybe kind of a definition or maybe clarifying the kind of vague title of this talk. Jan, what is it actually that design should save us from?
What design became, if you look to it nowadays, what it can mean is that design is not only anymore an object. Design became also or is able to link and to connect people through social media. So it is a kind of form where, I don't like that immediately to start with that, but it can build relations. So it can be a form of social design. Design is able also to formulate critical design, and design is also nowadays able, and was also already before, you see that also very nice in the exhibition, to make kind of speculation, narrative scenarios, and these kind of things. So designers, and especially Papanek, was somebody who was like already trying all these kind of tactics and strategies where the design field goes beyond the object, and there he plays an important role to show that design, materials, form, color have an implication and are not neutral anymore and are political. And then is your question, of course, again, what can it save us from? I'm questioning if it really can save us, but what it can do for sure is that at this moment it can help us to rethink the system from within. I really believe, I want to have hope, is that at this moment we are creating and producing more of the same problems, and we call them solutions, products that created the problem or the situation where we are in. And that is on the level of politics, on the level of economy, on the level of all kind of aspects. And I was talking with Nora just before. She called me the master of the disaster. Maybe she's right, but I'm also very hopeful, and out of every disaster something beautiful comes out. So I think design has the potential from within, with these kind of new expanded notion of design, to change itself.
Alison, if design can save us, can it also kill us?
Yeah, Yes, I think Papanek's key point was that design is actually as dangerous as it is a hopeful practice in many respects. And he talked about, in the 60s, about designers as one of the most dangerous breed of profession, that did more damage than even advertisers. And I think that's because at that point he's critiquing the idea of design only serving commodity culture, a non-critical commodity culture, that it's about expanding, it's not about sustaining or creating different options. And so I think that it's easy to, as a historian, to particularly romanticize this period of incredible political activity. And certainly, I hope our exhibition doesn't do that. On the other hand, I think it does show that there was that design at this historical point in the 60s and 70s that Papanek and his fellow designers are working was interlinked with other kinds of political activity. And be that thinking about different aspects of economy, like the developing world or the global south, as we call it now. You know, how do we think about social inequality? How does design address that? And now I think it's slightly more atomized in the way that we think about design. And I'm slightly concerned that the notion of social design, which has now seeped into small practices, corporations, the social design Papanek and his fellows talked about really was about engaging with real people. I slightly worry that the most dangerous thing about design at the moment is the misuse of the term social, that it's become a kind of catch-all phrase that doesn't really address structural change. It doesn't really address issues of economy, and that it's a kind of culture washing, that if we add a social designer, everything will be all right. So probably I'm slightly doom-filled as well, you know, that we need to kind of really think what we mean about the social in design.
Lucy, you, unlike all of us, actually have a practice that focuses on social and ecological issues. Now, do you think design and art can save the world?
We're definitely making a step in that direction. We hope we're making a step in that direction within our practice. Our practice is within the field of contemporary art, so it's not within the field of design. And I would say in the 90s, the kind of work that we were doing was very much criticized because we were talking about the social individuals marginalized and excluded. But today we're seeing a progression in our field of arts, and more artists involved working with communities, what has become social practice, socially engaged art practices. We've set up a number of strategies whereby we're tackling different subjects and different issues because we think we have to expand our notions of where we can be useful as an artist, and include as many people as possible in that process of working, for example, on water scarcity, or on the problem of homelessness, or on the issues of migration, or on biodiversity, loss of biodiversity and climate change. So in a sense, perhaps we're very similar to Papanek, that we are touching upon many different issues in the hope that one of these avenues will allow us to allow our practice, or our practice will enable others then to take those up and, yes, affect change. I would say that we are catalysts more, mediators in a process that will allow others to take up ideas and implement those. So by doing many different things at the same time, I hope that we can provide some kind of platform for others to do it. And I'm positive.
Just picking up on Lucy's point, I think that is an important point, that designers are mediators and intercolators as well. They're not just, you know, in the modernist paradigm that they solve problems or produce products. They're always in the middle of networks of other groups. And as we see in the exhibition, Papanek's very famous big character poster that he drew as a piece of co-design with students and other people involved in design very clearly sketches out this idea that the designer is just part of a a broader team of filmmakers, biologists, policymakers, and that's of course an incredibly contemporary idea as well, but a really significant one, that design isn't just this sole practice.
Absolutely, we can't do it on our own. We need to be connecting and nexusing with others in other disciplines and with the scientists and the philosophers and researchers.
Your practice is very highly participatory and collaborative. Actually, a colleague of mine, she sits in the audience, did participate in a workshop of yours, and she was very excited about it a long time ago in Australia. Wouldn't it be much easier to just, you have a strong artistic vision, just to, make decisions and just pull them off? Isn't it much more complicated to be in a team and such compromises all the time?
Yes, absolutely. It's not for every artist. I think over the years, working together, because I work together with my husband, my partner, Jorge Orta, we have developed this collaboration, and we very much respect those that bring a voice to the table and allow those voices to be heard outside of the studio. I don't know whether it would be easier to do it today. I think it would be impossible to do the kind of work that we're doing today if it wasn't collaborative. So in order to affect change, we need to be working with as many people as possible, as I've just said.
What is very strong on their work, or on where design and art really can facilitate change, is not just by showing it in an exhibition, but also the fact that you bring people together and then organize a meal or organize an action that they really have to act together and then experience it together. And it's through this embodied experience that you start to understand what can happen, what if, and then beautiful outcomes are there. So it's not by reading a text or not by listening to the radio and the news or on your phone. It's really about being part of that action itself.
Definitely generating discussions.
Yeah.
And out of those discussions, ideas can arise.
I would like to pick up on something that Alison said, the misuse of the term social. Now, Jan, you were not introduced in your third function, which is head of Department of Social Design at the Design Academy in Eindhoven. So you deal a lot with social design. What's your take on this misuse?
So I start the academy year, and that is like now 4 or 5 weeks ago. Like on the 4th of September, I said there is not such a thing as a social designer. That's the first thing I say. So you come here as somebody to be educated as a social designer. I don't believe in the social designer. He or she is not there. So design consists of a really holistic approach. There is a technical aspect, a technological aspect, there is an economical aspect, and there are like human needs, cultural aspects, political and environmental issues. And if you do a project, any project you want to do as a designer should integrate all these aspects. What we see now, and that's something we address, of course, and we stress in the department, is that the economical and the technological, let's say, systems became a trap in itself, and we have to formulate alternatives. What I mean with that is that the social aspects in the broad sense of the word have to be addressed and be reintegrated in design practices again. And that's where we, everybody that calls him or herself a social designer should take a position or a stance and reformulate and come up with a personal definition.
Alison, there was a period in time in the 60s and 70s when Victor Papanek was at the height of his career, publishing Design for the Real World, where he wasn't alone. There were other designers and individuals and collectives who engaged beyond the object or beyond form giving. Why was that period so political?
Well, gosh, I think listening to Jan speaking about the difference between the social, how you describe social now and then, I think if we just think structurally, it's not insignificant that much of that activism comes from the Nordic countries and Scandinavia, particularly Finland, and because they have intact social systems where they can utilize design as a broader societal tool. And that it does incorporate communities, people, as a matter of fact. Now, when we look at the social in the 21st century, we do not have those intact societies or communities or systems of provision anymore. We're seeing the complete neoliberalization of all structures and the diminishing of states. So I think when we talk about the 60s and 70s, Papanek in particular was totally enamored as an American-Austrian with Scandinavia in particular. It was an enormous influence. It basically was the basis of his book, Design for the Real World, which was first published in Swedish. It was completely based on his observations in Finland and Sweden, because that was about a different kind of provisioning. What we have now is a slight concern. I totally agree with Jan that designers need to be at the core of rethinking distribution systems, different ways of understanding how we sustain the world from the middle, not just on the periphery. But we also, I think one problem could be that designers become the aestheticizing force of a new type of social, that if you just tick a box that says social and you bring a designer in, then somehow the state is not responsible or broader people aren't responsible for big issues like disability or education. So, I think there is a big discrepancy. I think we have to be really careful we don't romanticize the idea that if you just do community work and participation, that it makes it useful and valuable. And also, it can become a form of elitism. You know, who participates, who involved? We're all an elite involved in art and design here. Who participates? Does what work? Does a workshop, participatory workshop that works in North London work in Pakistan? And so there is a kind of new force of colonialism within design in some ways, at its worst. That's what I'm saying. I'm being the cynic here. I'm being the devil's advocate here.
Lucy, what's your take on this?
I was thinking about the different participants that we have participated with. I've just completed a project with residents from a women's prison just outside of London, and it was an incredibly enriching experience to work with them 6 months. And now it's happening in the artistic practices as well, evaluation on the impacts of these kinds of workshops are taking place, but I'm really happy to say that it has changed some of those women's lives, so we can change people through our activities. And this kind of work is positive because it allows us to carry on doing more of it and to be able to evaluate and find out, has what we've done been beneficial to the well-being of individuals, is extremely important, I think, for the futures of our professions to understand the implications of what we're doing as designers and artists. Yes, Jan talked about the meal projects. I mean, we've engaged with communities all over the world, thousands of people simultaneously from all walks of life, in a way that art and design becomes part of people's daily lives without realizing that it's part of it. Having a meal around a beautifully laid table with beautiful porcelain plates, fantastic food is available to everybody. It's possible to do that. But at the same time, we're incorporating those rituals, but allowing those rituals to become something special for the individuals around there. And in places that traditionally didn't do this kind of, let's say, community engagement, in towns that haven't had the possibility to engage so many people, so much of the community. So. Participants and communities is very much at the core of what we're doing. And yes, we can't transpose our activities from one place to another. Each project has to be unique and special to the people that we're working with, you're working with. And we're very much involved in creating ambassadors or working with local artists that allow some of those processes and creative actions to continue beyond something that we might be involved in a very temporal manner. I think it's really important that finding ways to embed practices beyond a spontaneous action that we might do, but allowing things to carry on, so through mentoring, through ambassadoring, through finding and working with local participants and artists and designers that can carry on embedding and working together with local communities or local populations or groups or whoever those might be.
Yeah, and Lucy said earlier that her practice was, her and Jorge's practice was criticized in the 90s. Now, I would say there's a parallel development in design. Design in the 80s and 90s was very much about, I'd say, star architecture and Alessi and the latest hot gadgets. And only around the turn of the millennial, we see this resurging interest in a social agenda in design. Why do you think this changed?
Oh, why?
Maybe I can interject.
Yeah, maybe you should help save me here,
No,
please.
Going a little bit back in history. So in 2002, in 2002, big event.
2002.
You've moved it forward.
Twin Towers.
Yeah.
No, I'm just moving forward to where we got to 2000. The former head of the Design Academy in Eindhoven approached me to talk about a social, ethical design program, and we began talking to it before the Twin Towers disaster. But as soon as that happened, it was like the next day we should do it. So again, talking about the context. Events that trigger changes and shifts. That was a huge shift. And at the time it was called Man and Humanity, so it wasn't social design. But
exactly.
So we founded it as a result of this, this major event.
I found that too big, like Man and Humanity. So that became in the new master department that is founded 7 years ago, and that became social design. But it's really true that you have in history cycles. You have the crisis in 1930. Every 40 years, you have these kind of cycles of Kondratiev. We talked also about that in. So again, in the 60s, beginning of the 70s, again a kind of collapse. 2008, a next collapse. But now, through the acceleration and also technology and how things are going, you have we live almost in a permanent state of crisis. You see how that the crisis goes now, like from countries like Argentina, Spain, Portugal. So we live in really fundamentally different times when the Industrial Revolution started than at that time. So this urgency, or the urgencies that are formulated in, is something that appeals to designers. The Bauhaus also was the place where utopia wanted to be created, like a new world. And designers still have that mission to create a better world, whatever better may be, just like artists that are engaged in itself. So there, I think we are at a turning point, and where these things come together, where also institutes or organizations not only say we show, but we also want to act. And that is like that are fundamental shifts, and education is following that. It's not always like leading these kind of things, but it's following the societal needs and shifts.
I know, Alison, that you don't exactly believe in those Kondratiev circles. However, I would like to ask you, I mean, we did see this interest in social matters in the 60s and 70s, and then Victor Papanek kind of got forgotten, and now he's being recovered, rediscovered. But what does that mean for design in 10 years, in 20 years?
Oh gosh.
Will it be forgotten?
Yeah, I was just about to say one of the best things about what's happening in design is probably the fact that it's become uncoupled in some ways not, from this fetishization of the future. And you're asking me to make a future prediction. Because, as Jan was saying, you know, the idea of designers as the visionaries of utopian situations, and as futurists. And I think, on the one hand, I think why Papanek, to answer that question, is attractive now is because it isn't a futurist vision. It's actually quite a practical vision. And there are many movements, such as transition design and defuturing movements, that are saying, why are we always imagining there is this kind of natural cycle and we're on the road to somewhere? Obviously, this is the modernist, technocratic notion, whereas actually we're not resolving any of the present situations. We're always imagining it's going to happen tomorrow. And that's a lost dream, isn't it? So I think there is a big movement within design against the notion of the future, full stop. And we have to deal with the resources we have available to us now. On the other hand, critical design, which is in a way the kind of legacy of this 60s and 70s, I don't know how to tell that, because we have some representatives of that. That kind of did turn into a sort of futurism. Critical design, in some ways, has become a kind of futurism as well, imagining dystopias, imagining the worst-case scenario of things. And critical design at its best is really asking from the inside, what does design do? What are the assumptions we have about the things around us, the relationships around us? How, if we change our material culture, do we change the people we are, the human beings we can be? But then, on the other hand, some critical design, I think, has started to take the role that modernism probably inhabited once, about offering this vision of a future. And that slightly concerns me as well, this kind of turn to the futurist, who goes into a corporation to tell us what the future will be with their visions of... that slightly concerns me, that it's a reinvention rather than a dealing with the kind of sustainable present.
So wrapping up, because it's actually 6:45 and we all want to go and see the exhibition. Jan, will design save us? And from what? You still didn't answer that question, actually.
No. I think it's being said. Design won't save us, but it can be the catalyzer of change. And hopefully a systemic change, because that is needed. The more it stays in the systems we created before. Like I was... now I'm gonna do a little bit self-promotion. It's like I said 2 days ago something to Design that recycling plastic is bullshit, and they picked it up, and it's in fact it is. Because it's not really changing anything on the plastic, the plastic soup or ocean soup that we are creating. So it's not fundamentally tackling the issues that we have. And design should really think 2 steps ahead, and not just like on the next system to solve and to fix. And only when we are able to do that, it can fundamentally change something.
Lucy.
Well, I do think designers and artists have an important role to play in the possibility of making change take place, because we are, in a sense, neutral and malleable and flexible and can interact with different people, talk different languages, visual languages, technological languages as well. Yes, we can be very useful, I think, in a sense, in making this change take place, but only together with others, that's for sure.
Alison, final word.
I think one important observation to make is, although we're talking about transdisciplinarity and critical design and the kind of dispersion of design as an area and a practice, is our made environment is still really vitally important, and that design is a specialism. It isn't just a transdisciplinary phenomenon. And so I would hate to see lost in all of this the idea that design as a kind of practice that makes things around us is not as equally significant as a force for change.
So it will not change us, or will it change us?
I think
save us. Sorry.
I don't think design can save us, but I think it's an integral part of the plan, if there is one.
If there is one. Thank you very much. I would like to open up the discussion to the public. Is there a question to one of our wonderful panelists? Yes.
Yeah. 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 But I got a question. I think it's. I will repeat for everybody. The question is, of course, what kind of plastic are you talking about now? To make it very simple, I think, and that's very good to talk here in this circumstances, in this company, you could say, is that the first thing should be like, if we use plastic, we should use it for products that we want to keep for the rest of our life. Yeah? Plastic is one of the most remarkable, great materials that we have to keep for a long time, not for a short time. We are using too much plastic for too short time frames. Like, we want to keep something for 5 days in the refrigerator, but in fact the plastic that is around it can last 100 or longer years. So that's the discrepancy between using something and the design where that is not fitting. So it's not appropriate material. So we have to find an alternative. So now back to the remark of, and Papanek is all about sustainability and saying that the designer is in fact the criminal that is making and is instigator of a certain consumerism. So what I think, or what I believe, is that just by recycling it and separating it, we created a system that maintains the consumerism in the same place. So we are not fundamentally solving the problem. I want that we use that material, that fantastic material, in the right way. And that's not what we are doing. So the whole system came in place to keep an existing system that is not fully working well in place. And so we designed something to solve our guilt problem. And that's again a new economy. The economy is like that, an economy of guilt. So how can we now replace that? And that should be a kind of question where designers, together with scientists, biologists, chemists, material engineers, have to work on. But first things first we design products that are living with us for the rest of our life. Yeah.
Is there another question? Maya, she's actually a participant of the exhibition. Very exciting work. You will check it out later.
Thank you. I would actually like for you, if all of you could comment on this sort of like spectrum that exists within design, where we're talking about critical design or social design versus like super consumer, sort of elitist products that are sort of being glorified almost, and then that's what's being taught in design school, for example, right? So how do you sort of purge that kind of thinking or change it, in a sense, from within the system?
Yeah.
Whoever?
No.
Three teachers here.
I have an answer.
Okay.
Maybe I have an answer. What I hope is that this expanded field of design, or these concepts, these ideas, these scenarios, and also the exhibition, that they show that there are alternatives. So the moment we show and start also sharing these alternatives, they will be adapted and through the system itself. So it's like almost like the hyper object that you create that is like consumed by, and the criticism is immediately by capitalistic system used. So use the capitalistic system to change it from within. So that's like, first, I was like super activistic and saying against it, and then sometimes you have to sleep with the devil in order to change things. So that's how I think about it, and that's also what I try, at least in my department, to infuse this kind of very reactionary, very traditional ideas of that we have to be against. Yeah, maybe you can make them partner in crime. Maybe your design can become a Trojan horse that from within, can change a situation.
I certainly don't think, I mean, one of the criticisms that is made of critical design is it's just made for curatorship, that it just ends up in museums. Oops, we've just had an exhibition with some critical design in it. But I don't think it should be purged. I think it's absolutely crucial. I think it was a turning point in design culture that there was critical design culture, and I think it's had a massive impact, way beyond the museology. But I do think that when it starts to kind of be completely self-referential, then it needs to move on to something else and be dispersed in some other form. And if it becomes critical design for its own sake and has no practical purpose or no ramifications anywhere else, other than possibly even just supporting corporations in being slightly more imaginative in how they culturally represent themselves, then I think that's pessimistic. But as an intellectual activity, I think design absolutely has the right to be as intellectual as any other practice and critical.
Yes. Love Keller.
I do admire your optimism that thinking with the devil will change the devil. But aren't you afraid that in the morning you will wake up as a devil? Designers are problem solvers. What about problems creators? We have much more and more problem creators, I'm afraid, these days.
Yeah, so you're right. I agree. That's why I hope that the Trojan horse is like thinking 2 steps beyond. So like you try to achieve something, but in fact your goal is 1 step further. So that's what I want. So it's like fundamentally changing a situation. So, look, I want to hope, and that's also good about the exhibition itself. It gives also like empowerment. It's not just about showing the issues and the problems that we have today, but it's also showing ways out, and also showing that there are like big issues today, but there are also big achievements on the level of technology, on the level of even how that we organize society, on health care and so on. There are also big achievements. And this is something where design contributed to. So it's not one big negative story. And we should not forget that. Nevertheless, it's not distributed, it's not for everybody, it's not always accessible. So how can we do that? How can we deal with that?
Okay, I'd love to continue this conversation, and we will, with drinks in front of the exhibition or in front of the museum. Please come with us, have a look and enjoy, and look at the positive notes also. And I hope you will like it just as much as we do. Thank you very much for coming.